date is April 4th, 1993, and the wrestling world is ready for a spectacle of epic proportions. Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas has been transformed into an ancient Roman Colosseum for WrestleMania IX. The main event features a highly anticipated championship bout, and the atmosphere is electric. Bret the Hitman Hart, the reigning Federation champion, is a master technician and wrestling purist known for his precision and dedication. He stands opposite the imposing force of Yokozuna, a sumo wrestler of immense size and power. The contest is a clash of styles, technical wrestling versus brute strength. Hart, a smaller man, attempts to outmaneuver his gargantuan foe, employing a strategy of speed and agility to wear him down. He executes a series of masterful moves, but Yokozuna's size is a persistent obstacle. The tide seems to turn in Hart's favor when he manages to get the big man into his signature submission hold, the sharpshooter. The crowd erupts, sensing a victory for their hero. But then, a moment of treachery shatters the illusion of fair play. Yokozuna's manager, the devious Mr. Fuji, throws salt into Hart's eyes, blinding him and allowing Yokozuna to steal the pinfall and the championship belt. The crowd is stunned, their hero defeated by a cheap shot. As the smoke clears, a figure emerges from the backstage area. It is none other than the immortal Hulk Hogan. He walks to the ring, seemingly to console the defeated champion. But what unfolds next is a moment of pure, unadulterated opportunism. Fuji, high on his client's victory, challenges Hogan to an impromptu match. Hogan accepts, and in a mere 22 seconds, he defeats Yokozuna to reclaim the championship. It is a moment that sends shockwaves through the wrestling world, a surprise ending that nobody saw coming. On the surface, it seems as though the noble Hulkster has come to the aid of his fallen comrade. But behind the scenes, a different, more insidious story was unfolding. A story of jealousy, betrayal, and a deep-seated animosity that would fester for decades. Even today, after Hogan has passed away, Bret Hart remains bitter, calling Hogan a selfish liar, a man who would do anything to remain on top, even if it meant stepping on his friends. The grand spectacle of WrestleMania IX, a night that appeared to be a testament to Hogan's heroism, was, in Hart's eyes, the moment he stole the championship from him, an act of calculated manipulation that would define their relationship forever. The genesis of this profound and lasting animosity can be traced back to the moment Hart won the championship in late 1992. Vince McMahon, the visionary and often ruthless leader of the company, had assured Hart that this was not a short-term title reign. He was to be a long-term champion, the new face of the company, and had nothing to worry about. Hart believed him. He had worked tirelessly to reach this pinnacle of his career, and he felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that he was the one chosen to lead the company into a new era. But this feeling of triumph was short-lived. Just as Hart was establishing himself as the new champion, Hulk Hogan, who had been on a leave of absence due to the looming steroid scandal, returned. Suddenly, the dynamic between the two men shifted. Hogan, who Hart had once considered a good friend, became cold and distant. Hart recalls a specific instance where he saw Hogan for the first time since winning the title, and upon extending his hand to greet him, Hogan, in conversation with Brutus the Barber Beefcake, simply ignored the gesture, his arms crossed, leaving Hart hanging. It was a shocking moment for Hart, who had always believed they were on good terms. According to Hart, Hogan had a perception of himself as the undisputed top dog, the center of the wrestling universe around whom all else revolved. Everyone else in the company was, in Hogan's mind, a backup player. When Hart won the championship, he became the enemy, a threat to Hogan's throne, and someone who had to be removed. Hart, sensing this shift in Hogan's attitude, expressed his concerns to Vince McMahon. McMahon, ever the master manipulator, reassured Hart that he had nothing to worry about. He told Hart that Hogan had nothing to do with his championship reign, and that Hogan was being featured in a tag team with Brutus Beefcake. This was a temporary fix, a distraction, and Hart believed him. But the truth was far more complex and Machiavellian. The first inkling of the impending betrayal came on the eve of WrestleMania IX. Hart arrived in Las Vegas and was immediately summoned by Vince McMahon. The news McMahon delivered was a gut punch. "We're taking the belt off of you." McMahon outlined the plan. Hart would drop the belt to Yokozuna, and then Hogan would immediately win it from him. As Hart listened, A wave of fury and demoralization washed over him. He believed with a profound certainty that Hogan was behind this, pressuring McMahon with threats of leaving for World Championship Wrestling if he didn't get the championship back. The irony was not lost on Hart. Hogan, the man who had ignored him and treated him as a rival, suddenly became his friend again. He approached Hart and said, "I want to thank you so much for doing this." In that moment, Hart saw through the facade. He saw a man who was only being his buddy again because he was getting what he wanted. Hogan even said, "I'll be happy to return the favor." Hart, with a steely resolve, replied, "I'm going to hold you to that." Following the debacle at WrestleMania IX, Hart's popularity didn't wane. He remained one of the top stars in the company, if not the top star. But now Hogan was the champion, and Hart's moment in the sun had been cut short. Hogan and the Federation went on a European tour, and it didn't perform as well as expected. Hart believes this is when Vince McMahon started to have second thoughts about putting the belt back on Hogan. Hart began to sense that his time was coming again, that he would win the belt back, most likely at SummerSlam 1993, in a dream match against Hogan. It seemed like an inevitable clash between the two biggest stars in the company, a resolution to the injustice that had occurred at WrestleMania. The phone call from Vince McMahon finally came. "We're going to put the belt back on you," McMahon told him. "We're putting you and Hogan together at SummerSlam. You're going to beat him right in the middle of the ring with a sharpshooter." Hart was ecstatic. It was vindication, the moment he had been waiting for. McMahon said he hadn't told Hogan yet, but would do so in the next day or two, and that there shouldn't be any problem. This was 4 days before the King of the Ring event. 2 days later, Hart called McMahon for an update. The news was devastating. McMahon informed him that Hogan wasn't on board with the plan and that he didn't want to lose the belt to Hart. McMahon, in a moment of candor, told Hart that Hogan had said Hart wasn't in his league and he refused to put him over. But McMahon, ever the appeaser, assured Hart he was still working on it. "I think I can talk him into it before Sunday." Hart showed up on Sunday to the King of the Ring event in a state of fury and disbelief. He had considered Hogan a friend, a peer, and had worked his entire career to reach this level. He was especially mad after the promise Hogan had made in the dressing room at WrestleMania IX. He was then informed that Hogan still refused to drop the belt to him at SummerSlam. Instead, he would be facing Jerry Lawler, a significant step down from a main event championship match. For Hart, who had been the champion, this was a bitter pill to swallow. Holding the Federation Championship belt meant being the highest-paid wrestler in the company, and he felt he was being robbed of what he had worked for, both in terms of prestige and money. Hart considered confronting Hogan before his match with Yokozuna, the man Hogan would now lose the belt to. But he decided to wait in case the confrontation became physical and one or both of them were injured. After Hogan dropped the belt to Yokozuna, Hart went back to the dressing room and confronted him. "I heard you said I wasn't good enough to work with you." Hogan replied, "I never said that." Hart proceeded to repeat everything McMahon had told him, and Hogan denied all of it. That's not how it happened. The tension in the room was palpable. Hart, unable to contain his anger, called Hogan out on his lies. He then told Hogan that he would never be in his league and stormed out of the dressing room. The next day, Hogan approached Hart, claiming it was all a misunderstanding and blaming everything on Vince McMahon. Hart, still seething, was taken by Hogan to McMahon's office to supposedly get this straightened out. In that meeting, McMahon and Hogan concocted a story about how the SummerSlam match was never going to be a title match and that Hart had misunderstood. Hart, knowing this was a complete fabrication, called them both out as liars. He abruptly stood up, his fury at its peak, and left the room. A few weeks later, Hogan left the company, and it became clear to Hart what had been happening all along. McMahon had been under immense pressure from Hogan. But by then, McMahon had realized Hogan wasn't drawing as strong as he once had, and it was too late. The belt was now off of him and back on Yokozuna, and Hart's moment had been stolen. While Hart did eventually win the belt back, he was still bitter that he had to share his reign with others, including Yokozuna and Diesel, believing it should have been his time as champion alone. This animosity, this feeling of betrayal, never left him. Even after Hulk Hogan's passing, Bret Hart's bitterness remained. He recalled in an interview how he always thought Hogan would be happy for him when he won the belt. But instead, he became the enemy. He described Hogan as a classic BS artist, a man who would tell a lie without a second thought. This profound sense of betrayal, born from a single selfish act at WrestleMania IX, defined their relationship and solidified Hart's perception of Hogan as a man who would manipulate, lie, and steal to stay on top. A man who in the end was not a hero, but a real-life villain. Of course, this story unfolds through Bret Hart's eyes, a perspective shaped by deep personal wounds, and may not capture the full truth of Hulk Hogan's legacy, especially now that he's passed. Regardless of the complexities and controversies, Hogan remains a wrestling legend. Yet revisiting this chapter reveals just how ruthless and unforgiving the backstage world of professional wrestling can truly be. In the end, legends may rise and fall, but the scars left behind in the shadows of the ring never truly fade.